What's up, y'all? Cliche Dude Stuff back at you with another video in the A Movie a Day series. How is everyone doing today? By now, y'all know the drill. We're going to go ahead and hop right into it. The movies that I watched in June of 2023. And I did slack off a little this month. I watched 31 movies as opposed to about 35 is what I like to average, but it is what it is. We started off with Holy Grail, the Monty Python movie. And it's a classic. Most people that are watching this video have probably already seen it. Of course, it's got the famous flesh wound bit, which is hilarious, never gets old. One of my favorite bits kind of towards the end of the movie with the little killer rabbit, little killer bunny. I love the little bits with the coconut making the horse, and just typical Monty Python humor, and I love it. And check it out if you haven't already seen it. But there's not really much I can say about it that hasn't been said already. Like I said, it's a classic. Moving on from that, I watched District 9, which is basically humanity's racism or xenophobia to aliens that land on the planet, and kind of how we end up treating them as second-class citizens. It's actually a really good, really underrated movie in my opinion. I won't give away too much because this is one of those I think you should go out of your way and watch if you are able to, and if xenophobia towards aliens just trying to live their life sounds interesting. Moving on from that, I watched Gone in 60 Seconds, another Nicolas Cage movie. As y'all recall, a few months ago, I went on a Nicolas Cage bender. This was one of them that I skipped because I seen it years ago, but it's honestly not one of my favorites. But I figured, why not? I watched so many Nicolas Cage movies this year. Let's go ahead and, it's one of his classics, I guess. And it just doesn't do it for me. It does have Christopher Eccleston in it, who I love, very underrated doctor from Doctor Who. But yeah, I mean, Nicolas Cage is obviously good. He pours his heart and soul into everything that he does. But it's just, maybe it's the subject matter that it just doesn't really click with me. But it's there's no point in, if you've seen it once, it's fine, I guess, is the best way to put it. Moving on from that, I watched Fool's Paradise. I love Charlie Day, so I seen the trailer for this and I thought it looked interesting, and it's an okay movie. I don't hate it by any means, but I mean it's just okay. The decision to make Charlie Day, for the most part, not talk throughout the majority of the movie was interesting. But I mean, again, it's worth watching, but might not one you'd really revisit. Now, moving on from that to one of them that is more than okay, a classic and amazing movie, one of Robin Williams' best, Dead Poets Society. This is one of them it's always stuck with me, and it kind of shows more of the heart that Robin Williams. Well, I don't know about heart. He brings heart into a lot of his movies, but it's more than just him being funny. I feel like it gives you a look into Robin Williams' soul in that movie, and it's really good. It stars a young Ethan Hawke as well, which is interesting. We're gonna come to Ethan Hawke towards the end of this video, but yeah, Dead Poet Society, really, really fantastic movie. Probably my favorite Robin Williams movie, maybe. But yeah, really good. Highly, highly recommend it. And moving on to one of my favorite horror movies, John Carpenter's The Thing. And I love practical effects and I love body horror. And I'm not somebody who is just very anti-CGI in modern movies. I do think a lot of times it can be overkill. But whenever CGI and practical effects can work in tandem, I feel like that's the best combination. But anyway, The Thing, a classic, which it wasn't an instant classic. It was actually pretty much hated whenever it came out. It definitely didn't have the impact that it has nowadays. It actually caused John Carpenter to, I believe, lose some movie contracts that he had, if I remember the story correctly. But yeah, The Thing, an amazing movie, about an alien trying to simulate human life. Some pretty, amazing effects, especially for the time, but they hold up really, really well, in my opinion, which is one of the main reasons I love practical effects, is because they don't age nowhere near as fast as CGI. But anyway, if you haven't seen The Thing, highly recommend it if you're into horror movies and stuff like that. But if you are, you've probably seen it at this point. Moving on to Megan is Missing. And I've said this a few times by now, I believe, but just because a movie tackles a subject matter that needs to be talked about doesn't automatically place the movie on a pedestal that it's a good movie. Megan is Missing was not a good time for me, and in fact, I feel like it was problematic in some areas. I'm not gonna really get into it. I don't really recommend it, and if you like the movie, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to like just be overly negative, but not really the best movie, especially about the subject matter, in my opinion. Moving on to something completely. A lot of these movies, whenever I watch them, it's not like I follow like any rhyme or reason. For the most part, I'm just picking movies or going by with what people are recommending. But yeah, so a lot of it can be like jarring. I'll go from like a comedy to, a very sad drama or whatever. Sherlock Jr., the Buster Keaton silent movie from the 20s, 1924 maybe. Just really old movie, really funny movie. Of course, it's filled with cliches and stuff because it's one of the movies that a lot of the like comedy cliches come from, and I love it. Super cute. Buster Keaton, obviously a legend. I love just the simplicity of silent film, and but also just like the I don't know, the endearing way it holds up really well, and the effects that it can have on you as a viewer, I think. But I mean, I love the movie, and it's actually on Tubi. I believe that's where I watched it. So I recommend it. I mean, Tubi's free with ads, so there's no reason not to watch it. It's a little over an hour, so definitely worth the time investment. Moving on to Tourist Trap, which is a early slasher film, kind of before they really had the slasher genre figured out. And it is a goofy little movie, but I love it. I love the goofiness of it. I love the fact that our killer has like telekinesis, and I love the little plot twist that is super super obvious, but maybe back then it wasn't super super obvious, and it was just a fun little time. After that, I watched House of Wax, not the remake from 2005. Not necessarily the original. I think there was one version of this movie that was made before, but this is the Vincent Price version. Such a fun little old timey movie, and I sometimes I guess I don't use I use a lot of repetitive adjectives. My vocabulary isn't expansive. I apologize, but it is a good movie. Maybe boring for some people who are used to like modern slashers. There's not a whole lot of kills in this movie, and it's not about the kills. It's about like the psychological horror and just kind of like the suspense and whatnot. And I think the practical effects are done really well. It's from the 50s, so. But yeah, House of Wax, really, really good movie. I am planning to watch the remake probably in July. I just haven't yet, so that won't be on this list. Moving back to another black and white film, this time Charlie Chaplin in The Kid, and it's another fun little wholesome movie. Charlie Chaplin, of course, being a legend in silent film comedy, and it's just a fun little enduring movie. And again, it's going to be filled with cliches and things like that, but that's kind of where the cliches and stuff come from. So yeah, really, really good time. And I want to say it's on Tubi for free as well. I use so many different like streaming services and platforms to watch these. Sometimes they get jumbled, but I'm pretty sure it's on Tubi for free. Moving on to Snakes on a Plane, which I hadn't seen in years. I just wanted to watch a good little goofy movie, and I forgot how much I love this movie. Samuel L. Jackson, of course, is just so phenomenal. It's amazing to me how he can go from something like, Pulp Fiction to something like Snakes on a Plane, then of course being Nick Fury, and just he's all over, and I love it, and I'm here for it. One thing I don't remember about Snakes on a Plane, for whatever reason, I don't remember spoilers, but I don't remember the dog dying so graphically. What? Like, I feel like since, John Wick and that whole thing, and like people, we hate animals dying in movies. especially for just like a little throwaway thing. At least with John Wick, it was like the central point to like the whole franchise. But a little puppy just dying by a snake on a plane for like no reason. I mean, and then the villain, or I say the villain, the villain, the one who causes the dog's death, immediately gets his comeuppance. But it's not worth it. Why do you have to kill the puppy? Also, a lot of the bad people don't get their comeuppance. The little douchebag rapper guy, nothing happens to him after like, holding people hostage with a gun. And I'm like, what? But I mean, it's still a fun time if you haven't seen Snakes on a Plane. Not a good movie, but a fun movie. Moving on to what I do consider a good and fun movie, and another Ethan Hawke movie. I watched a lot of Ethan Hawke this month. Predestination, and I don't want to say too much because this is a movie I think you should go in not knowing anything about. I had heard about this movie, like I've seen it like listed in comments on like list videos and stuff whenever people are talking about like mind trip movies and stuff. But I just knew it was supposed to be like a mind trip of a movie, but I didn't know the details, and I'm glad I didn't because this is a mind trip of a movie, and it's really good. There's probably holes that the things that connect probably don't actually connect whenever you think about it logistically, but I don't care. And some of it, like once you kind of understand where the story is going, and you kind of piece it together, you probably get to the ending before the movie does, but that's fine. I feel like it's worth it. It's a great movie. I just enjoyed this movie so much. Moving on to one that was recommended by a coworker called Fractured, which I believe is a Hulu original. And I believe the lead of this movie really channeled Jensen Ackles, because I got that vibe the whole way through this movie. This is a movie I enjoyed. I will say I wish they would have done something different than the outcome. I wish they would have went another way with it than the twist, because I feel like the twist was actually more obvious than if they would have subverted our expectations. I feel like that would have been better than the twist that they went with. But it was still a fun movie, a good little suspenseful movie. Moving on to Incident in a Ghostland. It may just be called Ghostland in some places. I've seen it called both, but the version I watched, it was titled as Incident in a Ghostland. This is by the same director that made Martyrs, so that should kind of tell you what to expect. I enjoyed it. It's not as held in such high esteem as Martyrs, and I think that's for a reason. I will say it does have violence towards women. I saw a comment that kind of had a point to make about how this director kind of has a knack for making movies with violence towards women, and I don't know if that's something that, yeah, I'm not touching that. I don't, just beware if you go into it. Much like Martyrs, there is violence towards women that can be uncomfortable. That's where a lot of the discomfort comes from. And there was some, like behind the scenes issues. Like one of the main leads, I want to say she got a scar on her face because she was convinced to do a unsafe stunt, and it ended up like glass ended up like cutting her face, and it like permanently scarred her. I looked into it a little bit. It's been almost a month since I did that, so I honestly don't remember everything about it. But I know like there was more issues that I found in this movie than I found with Martyrs, especially behind the scenes. But I do think it's worth a watch. There's just more like kind of more negativity than Martyrs. Anyway, moving on. Another Hulu original, I believe, called Run, which is kind of similar to the Gypsy Rose story. There's a girl who is sick her whole life, only to find out that her mom is faking it, more or less. And that is all I'll say about it, because I thought this was just going to be a rehash of the Gypsy Rose, like the real life Gypsy Rose story. But it takes a few, some different twists and turns and things like that. And I love the way this movie ended. And I'm just going to leave it right there. And I do recommend Run. if you like slow burn, like thriller type deals. Moving on to one of them that I don't think many people will like, it's called Mad God, which is like a stop motion claymation type deal, which from the moment it was conceived until the moment that it was actually made, I think it was like a 30-year gap. Um, but yeah, this movie was really fun. The story is kind of, it can be incoherent with what's going on. I had to watch a few YouTube videos to really make sense of it myself. But I mean, you're really watching it for the experience anyway. It's not necessarily to follow an intricate storyline. And there's like no dialogue in the movie. There may be like a couple words spoken, but you're just watching it for the stop motion horror, and I think it is an enjoyable time. Okay, moving on to this next movie that I watched in a very weirdly ironic time. So I watched it at the start of the week. It's called Underwater, starring Kristen Stewart. Great movie. I loved it. I loved it pretty much from the get-go, and then like where it ends up, which it ends up being like this just, oh wow, it is another one I don't necessarily want to spoil. Basically you're underwater, but then there's aliens type of deal. I'll just leave it at that. But I watched this movie at the start of the week, and then the thing with the sub happened, the submarine, and I partially feel guilty because I feel like I summoned the failure of the submarine whenever I started this movie. I jinxed it somehow. I just feel like I did. But Underwater, great movie. Highly, highly recommend watching it. These next movies, not necessarily great movies. I love most of them, at least two of them. I had a week off work and I wanted to watch something. I just wanted to turn my brain off, game, and watch goofy movies. I watched all of the Scary Movies. Scary Movie 1 and 2. Of course, there's some bits that don't necessarily hold up in a, this day and age with being more like conscious about the jokes we make and things like that. And some of the jokes, even back then, they're just not funny. They're just offensive to be offensive. But a lot of the jokes land, whether they're offensive or not. Again, particularly in Scary Movie 1 and 2. Then you have Scary Movie 3 and 4, or 3, 4, and 5, which kind of follow their own story. So like one and 2 are kind of disjointed. They're not connected to anything unless I'm just having a big mind gap. And then 3, 4, and 5 are basically connected, have most of the same characters and things like that. Except Scary Movie 5, I think, is completely on its own. No, I'm doubting my memory, but because I don't feel like Brenda or Sydney are in 5. It's just Ashley Tisdale and the other lady whose name escapes me. But I think the Wayans only really had a hand in 1 and 2, and then 3, 4, and 5 was just kind of like the studio's handling, which, and you can tell the quality does drop, but even in 3, 4, and 5, there are still some bangers. You have Leslie Nelson, love him, from Airplane fame and the Naked Gun movies. And then, Kevin Hart just kind of doing his thing early on in his career is great. So yeah, really funny movies. Not great movies. Again, some of the humor definitely doesn't hold up, but I think they are still a fun time. Then another movie I watched, this was a weird one. I had heard about it, but I never really had an interest in watching it until someone recommended it to me. It's called Teeth, and Teeth is about and apparently this is like a real thing in mythology or something, where the female parts have teeth, and yeah, and it's a goofy movie, and I don't know what all I can say about it on YouTube, but I think it's on Tubi for free, so if you think that fancies you, then by all means. The next 3 movies I watched in a trilogy, I'm actually going to hold off until last. If I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to forget. So the movie after that trilogy, I watched The Room on the 20th anniversary in theaters, and it was so fun. I went with a coworker and her boyfriend, and the theater wasn't packed, but it was probably about 3/4 of the way full. And it was one of those times where people wouldn't shut up, but it was all the better for it. Whenever the famous lines, like, "Oh, hi, Mark, are you tearing me apart, Lisa?" Or "How could you love him?" Like, all the things, like everybody was just saying the lines and just laughing at the appropriate parts and pointing out things, you know, like the spoons, and it's just great. I loved it. I never seen The Room in theaters because whenever it came out, I was 10, 9, 10. So I am super happy I got to experience that. It was so fun. After that, I watched Anna and the Apocalypse, which is a musical zombie movie that takes place during Christmas time. And I loved it. It was so cute. I've seen it described as Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land. And yeah, it was fun. The ending wasn't what I expected, but there is a song in the movie that says what, like no Hollywood endings or something like that, and it makes sense because the way it ends, like, it's not necessarily satisfying, but it's fun. Anna and the Apocalypse. Now again, it is a musical. A lot of the reviews I saw for the movie were mad that it was a musical, but it's a musical, so know that going in. But it's a fun time. After that, I watched Kung Pao Enter the Fist. This is another goofy movie if you haven't seen it. You have to be in a certain mindset to watch this movie and enjoy it. It is really stupid, really silly, but really fun. And it's another one of those where, what else can you say that hasn't already been said about it? But it's a really fun movie. After that, this is why I want to circle back to the trilogy, because I didn't want to end on like a just a meh, which I want to end these videos on a high note if I can. And I know I'm just blasting through these movies, but I don't have a huge vocabulary. There's only so much I can say off the cuff without making a script. And that's all I'm doing in these videos. I'm just word vomiting, just thoughts off the cuff. And yeah, there's only so much I can say, again, that hasn't been said already. But anyway, Run Rabbit Run. Is it another Hulu original? Maybe. I don't know. I feel like I watched a lot of Hulu originals. But it's a slow burn movie that I feel like doesn't earn the right to be a slow burn because it's not satisfying enough. To me anyway. I mean, I enjoyed it, and then it ended. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I can take a slow burn if the ending is, you know, satisfying, or it like subverts our expectations, or there's some type of payoff, but it just predictable, and it was just kind of like, okay, like, I'll never watch it again unless somebody just wants to watch it. But like, as you know, Jeremy Johns says, I won't remember this movie in T-1 day. Now, moving back to the trilogy, and the last thing I'll talk about in this video, the Before trilogy, starring Ethan Hawke and, I always mess her name up, Julie Dupre? I'm so sorry. Again, I don't have notes. I just have my list of movies in front of me, and I'm so horrible. I apologize. But yeah, the Before trilogy. Before Sunrise came out in 95. Before Sunset came out in 2004, and Before Midnight came out in 2013. I think I got those dates right. So they were released 9 years apart, and each movie takes place 9 years apart. And I'm going to say this because I need to talk about these movies, and I need to spoil these movies. So without spoilers, watch these movies any way you can. Criterion Collection would be ideal, but you can rent them. I don't think you can stream them anywhere, but if you don't want to pay for the physical media, you can rent them for a few dollars each. Highly, highly worth it, in my opinion. I'm going to jump into spoilers. So, and again, this is the last thing I talk about. So if you think you might want to watch these movies and you don't want them spoiled, you can leave here. That is perfectly okay. Thank you for joining. Okay, so Before Sunrise, you have Ethan Hawke and I am so second-guessing myself on her name, and I am so sorry. Her name is Celine. I'm going to just call her Celine. So you have Jesse and Celine. Jesse is Ethan Hawke. Celine is Julie something. And now I'm doubting if it's Julie or Judy. I'm sorry. Anyway, so you have Jesse and Celine who meet on a train. And Jesse is American, Celine is French. They don't know each other. They're just, Jesse's in Europe, basically is like a vacation getaway thingy type deal, trying to find himself, that type of thing. And then Celine, can't remember why she was there. She was just riding around Europe. I don't know. But they end up just like having, a conversation, and then, and they click really good, really well. Whenever they get to Vienna, I believe, Jesse convinces Celine to get off the train with her and spend the evening with her until he has to leave in the morning. So they get the bond and everything. The whole movie, and really all the movies, are just them walking and having conversations. And y'all may know by now that I am a huge dialogue person. I know some people, they want the action, they want the explosions, they want all the things. They want intricate plots woven in, and that's totally perfectly okay. My bread and butter is just watching characters talk and they have a good back and forth, and especially with these movies, because there's so many long shots. It is insane. And what's also interesting about this trilogy is that the actors, the lead actors, Ethan Hawke and Celine, helped write the story as like the movie was being made, and like they have writing credit and stuff like that. But yeah, they're literally just dialogue movies, and I love them so much. So the first movie, ends with them more or less falling in love, or as much love you can fall into within like a 12-hour period, or however how long it was. But they decide not to share contact information, but they agree to meet up. At first they say, we'll meet back here in 5 years, but they're like, well, that's way too long. Let's meet back here in 6 months. But they don't exchange contact information because they don't want to like be talking and things just fizzle out. They want to keep that spark, that magic. And that's the way the movie ends. Like they part ways, and you just keep your fingers crossed that they meet up. And at the time, the follow-up movie didn't come out for 9 years. So like at the time you're like, well, that's just how the movie ends. So you just kind of like, it's ambiguous. You can kind of fill in what happens in your own head. But then Before Sunset comes out, and it starts off with Jesse, Ethan Hawke's character. He's a writer at this point. Well, he was always a writer, but like he's put out a book since the last movie, and he's kind of like wrote about his experience, not necessarily completely like a one-to-one, like they're different character names and things like that. But it ends with the characters parting, and he doesn't say whether they meet back up in 6 months or whatever it is. And then you find out that it's been 9 years since that day, and they didn't meet up. And it's like, ow. And you find out it was Celine who didn't meet up, but for a good reason. She had a death. Her grandmother died. And at first, Jesse says that he didn't visit, he didn't fly from the States back to Vienna, but he did. And he did all kinds of like cutesy little things. Like he put up flyers and stuff, I think he said, just trying to look for her. And it's heartbreaking. But, and then you find out, he's married. She has a boyfriend, but like he's always off on duty. And with Jesse's marriage, it's one of those things where, she got pregnant, so they ended up getting married, that kind of whole deal, but there's no real love there. So there is infidelity going on, which I do not condone, but that's just kind of like where we're at. But and he's got some resentment, the fact that she didn't meet up with him, those 6 months later. He's like, like what could have been, he's in a loveless marriage with a kid, which he loves his kid, and then, she's in a relationship that she doesn't necessarily hate, because she's an independent woman. She's got her own goals, and so her boyfriend can go off and do his thing, doing journalists or whatever it was that he does. And then, he's gone long enough for her to miss him. Then he's back they do their thing, they hang out, and then he leaves again, and then she can live her life. So it seems like it works out for her. But Jesse is he's crushed. He is so head over heels for her. And she is, she obviously is super attached to him as well, but she's also content with being her own person. Well, fast forward to the end of the movie, he ends up missing his flight back to the States to stay with her, and the movie ends. And then 9 years go by in real life and in the movie. And then we get Before Midnight. And this is the one that most people don't like, but for me, it really hits home, and it helped me come to terms with my own relationships, particularly my most recent ended relationship. But yeah, Before Midnight, come to find out that Jesse gets a divorce. Him and Celine get married. They have twins, but they're kind of drifting apart. Jesse's son is back in the States, and he's wanting to spend a whole lot, he's wanting to spend more time with his son. He's wanting to move back to the States, but Celine doesn't want to. She doesn't want to move to Chicago, which is fair. Like, Jesse moved to Europe for her, and if I remember right, they moved back to the States for a little bit, but then they moved back to Europe. But Jesse comes across like, I want this so bad, so this is what we're going to do. He doesn't say that, but he does make Celine feel bad for not being super eager to move to Chicago. And this movie is so real because there's not necessarily like, she's right, he's wrong, or he's right, she's wrong. They're both right about stuff. They're both wrong about stuff. Both of them are like, and some stuff like they would agree on if they could just communicate better. But it feels like there's been this bitterness, there's been resentment that's built up for one reason or another, and they've just started to more or less grow out of love or fall out of love. And it's heartbreaking to watch, but it's so real and it's so sad. And I think the saddest part, and again, obviously been spoiling the whole series, but the saddest part at the very end, like by the time the ending gets here, you're like, okay, I love both of these characters, but they are no longer good for each other. They just need to just go their separate ways. But they stay together, and I feel like they're all the worse for it. And I will say, I try to watch some YouTube videos about this trilogy, and I had to stop because I was disagreeing with so much, particularly because a lot of people hate it Midnight because you lose the suspense on if they're gonna get together, if they're whatever, they're married, so there's no longer a will they, won't they. But for me, it's like, will they, won't they separate? And the fact that by the end of the movie they don't separate, it's kind of a tragic ending, because especially for Celine, especially for both of them, because if they split, Jesse goes back to the States, he can have, whether it's half custody with his kid or whatever, which is the main thing he wants right now, because his kid's a teenager, and he's like, in a few years, he's going to be going off to college and all the things, and he hasn't really been there as a father, and he feels bad. But, they stay together, and I just feel like, in this hypothetical, fictional world, they may be able to make it work. But it's been, they've been together 9 years, or I don't know how long it's been since, Jesse's gotten his divorce and all that. But, they have twins that, they've built a family, and they more or less hate each other now. And they can definitely fix it. But I feel like they don't have the desire to fix it. Their desire to be right is more than their desire to love each other at this point. And it's so real. And it was a very tough watch. But because of that, if I just saw Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, say if that's where the movies ended, I would have adored that as a duology. But because of Before Midnight, this trilogy, one, is maybe my favorite trilogy now. I know that's sacrilege to Lord of the Rings fans, which is also a phenomenal trilogy, but this might be my favorite trilogy, and it is so profound. And again, I feel like it's helped me come to terms with my divorce, whereas and this is probably getting too personal for YouTube, but here we are. If me and my wife would have stayed together, she wasn't happy. I was just being the willfully oblivious idiot. And if we would have stayed together, and she would have been miserable until we were in our 80s or 90s, and then she would have regretted her life. But she decided to cut things off, and she's off living her life. She doesn't have to worry about second guess the things that might have been. So she's doing it, and I'm glad that she was brave enough to make that decision and didn't allow me to hold her back from living her best life. Whereas with Before Midnight, you feel like that's what happened, is they're holding each other back and they're just going to be miserable until they die. But yeah, so that's the Before trilogy. If you hadn't watched it, I just spoiled it. But again, watch it, form your own opinion. That's a very probably nihilistic way of looking at it, probably due to my own real life circumstances. But again, it's a positive on my life watching this movie because it gives me perspective. So watch this trilogy and get your own perspective. Thank y'all so much for watching. I know I spent probably a third of the movie talking about the Before trilogy, but I love this trilogy. It's so good. Ethan Hawke is freaking phenomenal. But yeah, anyway, that's a wrap. Those are the movies that I watched in June 2023. Thank y'all for watching. As always, if you have any requests, recommendations, suggestions, or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I will see y'all later.